Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Anti-Ambition podcast. My name is Victor Frankenstein, and in this podcast series, I will be giving you all my input on scientific discovery and the faultiness and nonsense of uncareful and immoral ambitions in the field. I come from a background of college studies and experiments that caused a lot of conflict in my life, and so I'm here to share my input on the topic in hopes of encouraging the youth around the world to avoid seeking a future in extreme experimentation. Because I've had personal experience with the topic we will be discussing, I suggest that you all truly take these words to heart and consider them, as I've seen such occurrences through and through. To give some background on my life, in my youth ages, I was very interested in the laws of science after seeing lightning strike a tree. I enjoyed reading and learning about philosophers and their thoughts that they put out into the world during this time, and this really fueled my passion. The occurrence with the lightning really inspired me to pursue my studies in more fact-based subjects temporarily, but unfortunately, I ended up switching gears back to philosophical subjects, which would eventually lead to a lot of conflict in my life. There were actually multiple times in my life when I betrayed my passion of mystery and discovery, but returned to it, and I regret each time that I ever thought returning was a good idea. So at this point, you're probably wondering what my experiment was and what the negative effects were. But I'd rather keep the specifics private for my own privacy and reputation. However, I will broadly describe the things that occurred, so stay tuned. After studying at a university, I observed a chance to earn honor by successfully attempting to build something that would definitely be deemed bizarre and impossible by the average person if someone were to find out. Not fully considering the potential consequences of my trials, I went forward with it. It resulted in something monstrous that honestly frightened me a lot. Later on down the line, the effects of this experiment included a severe amount of stress for me, pain inflicted on those who I love and myself, and guilt for all of the chaos that I had created. At the start of this experiment, I really could not have expected what resulted from it. I thought that this would only bring me honor and potentially bring about a new element in society, but that was very far from true. This leads me into my first point, that plans don't always turn out the way that they were intended to, and therefore extremely bizarre and ambitious experiments should not be conducted, hence the name of this podcast. Someone could expect to introduce an innovative and beneficial discovery to the world, but end up causing a lot more harm than good, and sometimes there truly are no good results at all. According to a group of neuroscientists from Max Planck Institute, and I quote, "For the brain, the estimation of event occurrence is influenced by two main sources of uncertainty: the actual probability distribution of events and the brain's inherent uncertainty in estimating elapsed time." And I quote. From this, we can learn that there is a lot of uncertainty involved in the consequences that we predict, and that the human brain is incapable of fully putting all of the pieces together to predict something accurately. Therefore, conducting experiments revolving around bizarre and unusual ideas such as cloning should be avoided because we are physically incapable of predicting everything that could result from it. The results could range from the death of test subjects, the death of others not directly involved in the project, harm on the environment, fear amongst people, and much more. Because serious consequences like these could occur, it is definitely best to stay away from conducting these insane experiments, because despite how much we try to plan everything out, there is always a good chance that something could go horribly wrong. The list of potential consequences of unusual experiments that I listed actually leads me into my second point, that these tests should be avoided because they can inflict harm on you and or others. As I briefly mentioned earlier, immediately after completing my experiment, I was terrified. I feared that I had truly caused something horrible, and out of exhaustion and stress, I became ill. However, this stress did not end there. Over time, the negative effects of my experiment caused even more stress than it did initially, as well as guilt and pain due to all the harm that I had caused. In addition to all of this stress and pain that I felt, my strange experiment severely impacted the ones that I loved as well. In retrospect, I definitely should not have went through with this experiment because of all the conflict it put into the lives of my loved ones and I. The negative consequences of the experiment fully outweigh even the potential positive impacts that it could have had, although there proved to be none in the end. Similarly, in other bizarre experiments, there is an extremely high chance that someone will be severely hurt in the process, whether that be from trauma, another mental illness, a physical illness, severe stress, physical harm, or even death. It is one thing to accept the risks that your tests impose on yourself, but the risk of inflicting harm on someone else is something that we should all take very seriously. Adding on to my point from earlier about how we cannot predict everything, Bruce Parker stated that, and I quote, "While the scientific method may lead us to a reasonable, thorough understanding of some phenomenon, unfortunately that does not always translate into an accurate, practical prediction capability that, for example, might help us avoid being killed." And I quote. From this quote, we can see that our lack of ability to predict, despite using the scientific method, can cause us to be unable to avoid death or other consequences. Most of us would prioritize protecting others over the potential benefits that could result from our bizarre experiments, so it is simply best to avoid these tests for the good of ourselves and others. Overall, the concept of attacking the biggest scientific mysteries of the world is not worth it at all. Many say that failures and risks are necessary for achieving any breakthrough despite the extremity of the test at hand. However, very often the negative impacts of these experiments outweigh the pros that it would have, usually because extreme experiments don't really ever turn out well. It is much better for society to take baby steps, as in do mini experiments over time until a wise conclusion or discovery is attained, rather than doing one big crazy test. Being more cautious is most beneficial for everyone. Although doing mini experiments requires a lot of patience, this patience is necessary. Rushing does not bring aid, rushing does not bring results, and rushing does not bring change. So to recap what we've talked about, although these strange but seemingly beneficial experiments might appear to be ideal for advancing the world's knowledge about a certain subject, they truly are a risk not worth taking because of the impact they can have on people and how these impacts are practically unpredictable. Just for a second, think about all those individuals in the past who have died or gotten severely harmed in some way because of an extreme experiment. Many innocent lives have been taken and others have had their life severely damaged because of these bizarre scientific tests. All individuals in society deserve our best effort in protecting them from these scenarios. I truly urge all of you young folks that are considering following the path of testing the powers of science through bizarre and unusual trials to reconsider your choices. But at the end of the day, the choice will always be yours. But I hope that this podcast episode allowed you to start viewing the topic from a different perspective. I personally went through the temptations of a desire for extreme scientific inquiry, and I know that it is very difficult to accept the fact that there may be some mysteries out there that we should not try to solve. Maybe those mysteries are there for a reason, though. In all aspects, it is best to control this desire in order to prevent causing unnecessary havoc on the world. Again, this is your life and you have free will to do as you please, but I suggest not letting your ambitions get the best of you. With that, I'll leave you all today. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and if you did, please subscribe and join me in our upcoming Anti-Ambition podcast episode next week, and I'll see you guys then. Thank you.